ask something?
Okay.
Mike's
Hello, everyone. Good afternoon.
just feel like
Welcome
it's
to our
hit or miss.
panel where
I've
we're
been
going to
on the road
talk
a lot lately.
on the topic of funds flowing to fiber. My name is Linda Hardesty, and I'm the editor-in-chief of Fierce Wireless and Fierce Telecom. We're trade publications. And I'm going to go ahead and introduce everyone here with me on the panel. Starting down on the far end, we have Will Arbuckle. He's policy advisor at the NTIA, part of the U.S. Department of Commerce. And in the middle, we have Jessica Koch. She's a broadband program manager at Calix. And next to me is Dan DaCosta, and he's principal with the carrier and reseller vertical at Zayo. The topic is funds flow to fiber, and they really are going to start flowing here pretty soon, mid-June we're looking at. Thanks to the $42.5 billion in BEAD funding, as well as other government programs to close the digital divide. And then apparently there's a lot of private equity money that is also going to be flowing to deploy fiber. So my first question I thought I would direct to Dan and Jessica. Just getting right into the nitty-gritty, like what are the first steps necessary for companies that want to deploy fiber to start applying for BEAD funding?
Go for it.
You want to
I'll
start?
follow.
Oh, I thought you would start.
Okay. Okay, so if you are an organization that's looking at deploying fiber into your network, I think the message is the time is now to start that planning. There are a lot of unique elements of applying for public funding that are required, and I think it's been transforming over time in terms of the amount of detail that's asked for in those applications. And so the time is now to start developing a proposed funded service area. What does that expansion look like that you want to deploy fiber into? And then you start taking steps with their internal or external engineering folks to really start to put parameters around what that engineering is going to look like. And then you start turning that into a cost analysis. You kind of take those engineering plans and you kind of start to put numbers to those and build a business plan for what does that look like. And you take into consideration how does that change your operation? What additional operational changes will that require? Does it require new personnel or does it require new training or both? And really putting that into a cost analysis. Many of these applications are going to require a lot of forecasting when it comes to homes passed versus penetration. What is the gross revenue going to look like, and what does the margin look like? And there's going to be an ask for a lot of detail associated with those numbers going into your application. And then really just making sure that you have the details around how that's going to change your operation and kind of take your operation to the next level, and what is that going to require? Are these new homes passed, or are you replacing fiber are you replacing some of your existing wireless with fiber? And what is that going to require on your day-to-day operation?
You said it very well, and I would just add, you need to start thinking about timing. And timing is going to be that long pole in the tent that we all need to think about as we go and take these funds and put it into action, because that is the thing that everybody forgets about until you have that money and the clock is ticking. And there are so many, several traps along the way, I'll say. But as you think about supply chain, permitting, cost, getting those all into place before you are set with here's the shot clock, go. It is extremely important to make sure that you have all of that in place, because some of the targets move. What it costs to do building in a municipality changes over time, and so making sure that you are working very closely with the munis that you're actually doing the building in is something that we constantly see being the kind of gotchas that you want to make sure that you vet on the front end and get that into place before it's too late.
Yeah, and I would just throw two things in when he talks about timing. The one thing that you really want to understand when you read the NOFO for the program that you're applying through is what the requirements will be for environmental studies. Because if there's an environmental study required after you are awarded money, just from being told you're going to be awarded, the time to complete that environmental study, depending upon where you're at, can be fairly extensive and can certainly slow down the process.
And I'll add, another buzz one that has come up a lot is, supply chain has been a big issue. And so when you think about the equipment that is associated with deploying these networks, last summer, everybody was struggling to have equipment ready to go into field. I know we at Zayo where we couldn't get cards fast enough. And that, making sure that you have that as part of it, because fiber is useless until you have the equipment to light it up, and making sure that you have that in place is extremely important.
And I think the other call to action when I say the time is now is if there's going to be collaboration required between you and a local or municipal government, that relationship can take some time to build if it is a new area of deployment for you. When we talk about BEAD and when we look forward to BEAD, we anticipate that there will be an extensive emphasis on collaboration and demonstrating local government support of your application. I know certainly in Colorado, we are seeing more and more emphasis on wanting to see community support, and sometimes they even want to see it beyond just a letter of support. How can you demonstrate that the city or the county truly buys into the project that you're working on, and more than just saying yes, we support. I think when we look forward towards the BEAD opportunity, certainly NTIA has a handoff to the states that will be kind of officiating the program, if you will. And then I think the states are going to look down to county governments and want to see that they truly do support, that not only it is an unserved or underserved location or area, but that the county or city is working to support that build.
And we saw that at the State of the Union where, Biden highlighted Buy America is, paramount as we look at the BEAD funding and all these funds. And so making sure that you have that connection with the municipality and truly are a partner, that will really help streamline as you go to market.
Yeah, so let's segue a little bit to Buy America, because I know that's Will's expertise. The NTIA is working on defining BEAD rules. Can you tell us a little bit generally about what you do and what's going on with that?
Yeah, sure. So thank you all for coming. The last panel standing between us and the happy hour, but appreciate you joining the panel or joining the room. So my name is Will. I lead the supply chain efforts at the NTIA, and really what that means is what you just heard my panelists sort of talk about, which is how do we think about the supply chain through the lens of Buy America. So I'm assuming people know what Buy America is, but just so that for those of you that maybe don't, there is a Buy America requirement. It's called Build America, Buy America Act. That was part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, and it's a domestic manufacturing preference for all of the money, for the $1 trillion that's going to go out, including the $42.5 billion that's part of BEAD. And so what we're doing at the NTIA is trying to figure out, with that statutory requirement that we have on having a domestic manufacturing preference, at the same time of trying to balance that with the overarching goals of trying to get everybody in the US access to high-speed and affordable internet. So what we're doing right now is essentially deep analysis, speaking to many of the companies here, but telecom companies, internet service providers, manufacturers, et cetera, basically getting a sense of what do the supply chains look like today, where does it absolutely make no sense to try to onshore certain products, and then conversely, where are there opportunities to actually move some manufacturing to the US. So that's a process that we're going through right now. I think to answer your question directly, later this summer, we intend to release guidance that will answer many of the questions that we get related to Buy America. So how do free trade agreements get taken into account? Who's responsible for compliance? things of that nature. So we'll be releasing guidance, and we'll also be releasing the final waiver, which will show here are the things that need to be made in the US, and conversely, here are the things that you can purchase from anywhere in the world.
Is the NTIA's timing going to be working well with the application timing for those of you that are helping companies with applications?
Well, I mean, I'll let you answer the technical.
Well, I'll start by answering, and then you guys can fill it in. On June 30th, we're required at the NTIA to give states their allotment or to announce what the allocations are. So by June 30th, states will find out if they get the minimum $100 million. Some states will get billions of dollars. We're trying to align our timing at NTIA, or my team is trying to align our timing with those releases. So don't quote me on June 30th, but the goal is that this summer, at the same time that states are finding out how much money they get, the stakeholders, many of the people in this room are also finding out here's what the actual Buy America rules are.
But I think in terms of the application, June 30th is when the allocations are announced, but then the 180-day clock starts for states actually submitting to NTIA what their plan is going to be. And that has to be approved by NTIA before the money will, or before the program will ever actually open at the state level for providers to be able to apply for. So in my perspective, this is a 24-25 flow, not a 23-24 flow.
Yes, money is not going to be going out this year. It'll start going out next year. I think
That's good
it's
to
safe.
understand.
It's safe to
How
bet.
long does it take to fill out these applications?
That's why I say the time is now. Start now in your planning. Start now in putting together, you can get a lot of guidance from other programs, whether you look at other NTIA programs or, you can look at USDA programs or even potentially state programs and just get an idea of what they're requiring in terms of information. I'm not telling you that the BEAD requirements are going to be exactly the same as what other programs are, but you're going to get a pretty good feel for the types of information that are required, and that's why I'm saying, really start to draw out what does that PFSA look like? What does that proposed area look like that you would want to go, and how does that stack up? I think the other thing that we really need to talk about and be cognizant of is how does that desired area you'd like to build stack up when you look at the FCC map or your state map, your state broadband map. One thing I will tell you, in my experience, I worked for a service provider in Colorado for 17 years prior to joining Calix, and we wrote applications from a state and a federal perspective. And the one thing I can tell you is know what the NOFO says and be very explicit in your application to follow what the NOFO says. Don't get aggressive on trying to bleed out into some gray area where maybe they're going to think it's served, maybe it's not. This is going to be, all money is competitive at some level, although the BEAD money is far more strategic in nature. They're all going to have some competitive element to them. And so make sure that the addresses and the locations that you're including in your proposed funded service area are truly deemed unserved or underserved, right? And keep your focus of your build on those locations, because when I think when you think about the role of the reviewers of these applications, any way they can find to throw out an application that really doesn't qualify, that starts to make their stack shorter, and you don't want your application to be in that stack. So keep your application as black and white as possible.
So how are companies deciding what areas they do want to deploy fiber to? I'm sure it has to do with looking at the map. Does it have to do with where they're headquartered? Does it have to do with the competition, or what are the factors that people are thinking about?
So I'll speak from what we're seeing a lot of our customers do, and it varies. A lot of customers are looking at it based on where they're currently serving today, whether it be wireless or legacy, other services. This is an opportunity to deploy fiber, and fiber is the most scalable solution out there. And so I kind of compare it to feeding my little kids. I can feed my kids chicken nuggets and it can be easy and simple, but the only way for them to actually grow is with, you know, a well-balanced meal. And that's what fiber is, and that is why you have the WISP trying to get rid of the W and WISP, and they are taking advantage of that. Same with, you know, other cable providers as they look at, you know, going and leveraging these funds that are coming into the pool. Additionally, though, there is the opportunity to continue to push out that edge and remove that edge and that buzzword edge that we all hear every single day. And so if you kind of look at where you're servicing, how do we take it, you know, a little bit further out and kind of broaden our reach? And that is another opportunity. And that's where Zayo and where we kind of fit in with our customers that are looking to apply for these funds, is that we're that middle mile provider, helping those last mile providers get to the proverbial edge.
And I think it has to do with where the fund's coming from. You know, if they're public funds, they have to be deemed either unserved or underserved. That's really the showstopper in my mind. I think if they're public funds that are coming from the state or local government, the definition of, you know, read the NOFO, what does the NOFO say the definitions are for eligibility, and know what those are. If they're private funds, that's totally different. You know, that goes to, you know, through a private firm, you know, to evaluate the project more on a business case type scenario.
And that's really focused on how many houses are you able to pass by and how many subs you're able to touch. And that's the major number that those private funds we're seeing are really focused on.
And you said you're seeing quite a lot of private equity coming in.
Very much so. Over the last probably 2 to 3 years, we've seen private equity be really focused on what we define at Zayo as kind of FTTX, fiber to the premise, but a lot of money coming into fiber to the home specifically. And as we look at, you know, in a post-pandemic world, we see the need for fiber. As I was saying before, you know, you can only do so much with a wireless connection or a cable connection. And as we continue to see the demand for bandwidth is just not static whatsoever. And what, you know, 100 megs could get you 5 years ago, it's becoming irrelevant now. And people are asking for gigs, and we're just going to continue to see that climb and climb. And the best way to go about that is fiber, and that is why, you know, we're seeing the very smart people with large piggy banks come in and invest into fiber and getting that fiber out to the edge.
And they're not looking at BEAD funding themselves. They're bringing in additional money.
Correct. Yeah.
So that they can move quite a lot faster.
Yep. Yeah. And then they're also, as Jessica was highlighting earlier, they are looking for providers that are getting BEAD funding and looking to kind of rocket ship that growth as part of it and be that, you know, additional funding as they go out to the space. So I think as we see some of the winners of BEAD, those will be some of the also targets for additional funding from the private space.
And Will, I was wondering if you know, like, how are the states doing getting ready? I would say a year ago, bunches of states didn't even have state broadband offices. It seems like they're doing a pretty good job. What's the status of that?
So if you imagine a sort of a traditional bell curve, I'd say that maps out the readiness of states. So there are some states that are like sort of extremely at the forefront. I don't actually work directly with Louisiana, but Louisiana is, I think, at the sort of very forefront of checking all the boxes and getting well prepared. And then you've got a bunch of states that are sort of in the middle of their preparation. And then you have states that really up through the election this past November, when we were seeing that when governors were transitioning off, there were some states that didn't even have a broadband office, and maybe that got delayed during the transition of a new governor. And we would, you know, they're more on the laggard side. But we're seeing, I'd say, a cross-section with, you know, I'm making this up, so don't quote me on it, but maybe it's a 10, 80, 10 type of dispersion, or, you know, 15, 7, 70, 15 sort of breakdown, if you will, in terms of states that are at the forefront lagging, and then the majority in the middle.
And I think I would just add that as, to the providers in the room, you likely have seen a number of state engagement activities that have been taking place over the course of the past several months. And I would also challenge you to be engaged with those state engagement activities, because the states are doing these specifically for the planning purposes of BEAD, and you need to be in front of the state broadband offices. The state broadband offices also have an NTIA program officer that are working with them, that have been assigned to every state, and be telling your story. Help them understand the region of the state where you're present. Help them understand what the obstacles to entry are. Help them understand why the locations that are unserved or underserved in your particular territory are so. Why is it difficult to make a business case to build fiber or to take technology to those locations? Because there certainly are those in every state. And as providers, you truly are the experts in the industry, right? You've been doing this for a number of years, regardless of the technology that you've been using. And so tell your story and tell it boldly. And if you're, just now infusing fiber into your network, that's okay, right? But help the state broadband offices, help be an element of the molding that's taking place regardless of the maturity level of the state broadband office. Because I think this is not the opportunity you want to miss to tell your story and help shape the broadband office's perspective about why the regions of the state are unserved or underserved.
So I'm sure that a lot of people that are hoping to get some BEAD funding are looking at big spreadsheets and business models. And of course, the question came up this morning on a similar panel. What's the magic number for the cost of homes passed?
Depends.
Yes.
I mean, it really varies based on where you're going. I think, a lot of us in this room know that from one municipality to the next, the cost to build is very different. And that, I think, Jessica, I was nodding my head up and down so much to what you were just highlighting right there, is because as you build your business case, make sure that you're documenting that business case, because what we find very often as we are building ourselves in the markets is that those variables have changed. And what it costs even 3 months ago to build in a municipality has changed. And so making sure that you are educating, the government officials on this is what our expectations are based on what we've cited, what we are building. That's how we make it all make sense, and this is how we serve the underserved or unserved at all, right? Is by making it make business sense. And when costs become inflated in certain of these markets, that's Jessica, as you were saying, why are they unserved? I mean, that can quickly, that's what first came to my mind, is that cost, and making sure that we can tell that story to all of the key stakeholders will go a long way.
And then I would just also throw out, make sure the other big eligibility requirement is that it's not been previously funded by a state or local or state or federal program. So, not only looking at the maps of eligibility, so either the FCC map and or your state broadband map, but really understand if there has been prior funding flowing to those locations, because those locations that have been previously funded also would be deemed ineligible. So just really, and of course you can see all of this takes time to truly evaluate. But I think I would just ask by a show of hands, how many of you have looked at the FCC map and kind of have an understanding of what that looks like? Many of you? A few? I think one thing that I would say is, as you look at the FCC map or even the state map, probably what you're going to notice right away is the build opportunities for unserved and underserved locations are not in your larger urban areas. So making a business case with funding is, over more rural locations is more challenging. And so even if you're just bringing a 25% match to the table, the last Colorado Broadband Grant application that I wrote from a service provider perspective only passed 80 homes in the sandhills of rural Colorado, right? And so, you can imagine, let's just pretend the number is $15,000 for buried fiber, and I'm just throwing that out, but, you throw that over, what can be, 60 to 80 miles, the business case for that, even at 25%, isn't very good. But the strategy for the BEAD money truly is to get to every unserved and underserved location. So kind of to tie back to my point about really engaging with the state and helping them understand the challenges that any provider is going to face in getting fiber to every one of these unserved and underserved locations is important to be known today.
And I would just throw out that we've written a lot of stories about the costs of fiber per home passed, and it's not very helpful because the baseline seems to be like traditionally maybe $1,000, $2,000 per home passed. But there were cases in remote villages in Alaska where it cost $200,000. So it's a pretty wide range. And speaking of cost things, I wanted to ask you, Will, so is NTIA taking into consideration that products made in the US may end up being more costly?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we know that there's a trade-off here in terms of if we require that certain things need to be made in the US, in all likelihood they'll be more expensive. The goal and sort of the balance that we're trying to find here is what can we move to the US where it's not going to be exorbitant, where it's not going to blow the prices out of the water, and we're able to have some sort of security in the domestic supply chain, improve our domestic manufacturing, and create more local domestic jobs. With the understanding that there are some things based on technology, current supply chains, et cetera, that just don't make any practical sense. So we're aware of it, and we're actively trying to sort of find that balance of how do you balance the two goals that I talked about earlier.
And sometimes in America, it's just the labor costs.
That's frequently the driving sort of input that is increasing the costs for sure.
Mm-hmm. Do you have anything to say about that, Jessica, from Calix's perspective in terms of its equipment that you'll sell for fiber deployments in terms of Buy America? Or?
Oh, I think I'm going to defer to Will on that one.
Yeah, no worries.
Same.
All right. So there are other government funding opportunities that could be more immediately available, which I'm not very familiar with, but I believe that you are, Jessica?
Yeah, for sure. So you may be aware that states are being awarded capital project fund dollars. And from those capital project fund dollars, states turn into state-specific opportunities. So there are a number of states that have capital project fund opportunities going on as we speak. I know of a number that are also kind of around the corner that have announced application windows. Colorado, for example, has one coming up this summer, I believe. But then there are also states that have more mature broadband offices that also just have in their budget dollars for further state broadband expansion. So, I would say that those are the two probably big state-specific opportunities. And then USDA has Reconnect Round 4 that we are awaiting award announcements on and are anticipating a Reconnect Round 5 late summer 2023 in terms of a window of opportunity for application. USDA also right now has a Community Connect grant that is open, I believe closes in June. Also, USDA has a technical assistance program that's open right now, so if you are a provider who's needing potentially some dollars to do the feasibility study, to do the things that go into putting together an application, USDA has a program open for that right now. So I would say those are the ones that are probably top of mind in many providers' minds.
Okay, and if anybody has any questions, I'm not sure if there's someone in here with a mic, is there? Well, so you'd have to stand up and we'd have to just be able to hear you. Raise your hands if anything comes up. So I kind of wanted to circle back to the beginning of this conversation in terms of the actual strategy to get get rolling. Did you want to talk about that a little bit more, Daniel, in terms of the deployment strategy?
Well, I think we kind of highlighted a bunch of different, ways, and Jessica highlighted the time is now. But I think, Zayo is very invested in looking to, who will be the winners of BEAD, because obviously we are that perfect partner as we look at these funds going into the providers doing B2C. Zayo is 100% B2B, and we're not going to be competing on these funds, but we are here to be that middle mile supplier as the money comes in. That is going to take all your focus is going to be at the local level, but as we think about that local level, it's how do you connect back to the core of where the infrastructure is at, and that's where Zayo is one of those unique providers that is happy to take advantage of our long haul network that passes by the edge and look for ways to connect to you and bring it closer. And so we're a really great partner as we look out to these funds and the deployments going, because there's going to be so many things that you're going to be focused on in the very local level, but that important piece of how you connect that local to the core is going to be extremely important. And that is where we look to be a major driving partner as part of all of this.
Yeah, so like the question, just sort of going back to the question around timelines and what's coming up, I think for the audience, I would note that in the weeks and like months ahead, the NTIA will be announcing middle mile grants. So if you're not familiar with that, that was a $1 billion program, so smaller than the $42.5 billion BEAD program, but there's a $1 billion program called the middle mile. Those grant announcements will be announced in the coming weeks and into, let's say, sort of through June, so you can keep your eyes peeled for that. We've already talked about that. By June 30th, states will get their allocation amounts. That will then kickstart this next part of the state planning process, where they have to put together their initial proposal. Once NTIA has reviewed their proposal, that's where the state then gets 20% of the money that they were allocated or that they will be allocated on June 30th. There's then another planning process where they have to fine-tune everything, and then that's where they get the 80% of their state allotment. So I would say right now, at least at NTIA and Commerce, we're sort of reaching this maximum sort of execution mode of there's all of this money that we're statutorily required to deliver, and there's all of these things that colleagues up here have talked about that states have to go through in order to get themselves prepared to receive it.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys have been following this whole discussion about the high threshold. I mentioned that, deploying fiber to a premise could cost $1,000 or $200,000. And so the NTIA has decided to create, or actually request states to pick a high threshold number above which, if it would cost more than that amount, they can use other technology, including fixed wireless access. And I don't know if you all have been following that, but it seems kind of relevant to this wireless show. I don't know if people in here are interested in fixed wireless access for BEAD money. Yes?
Question on the top. That's a good one, but I want to ask a different question.
Oh, sure, go ahead.
Well, sure. So I can answer this. So yes, there's something called the Extremely High Cost Threshold, EHCT. We're internally fine-tuning what the definition of that will be, but essentially what it means is the state will have some leeway in setting it, and then what will happen is if the cost of actually reaching residences is above that extremely high cost threshold limit, then the state has the leeway to choose whether they want to do fixed wireless or satellite or some other technology. If it comes in below that, then it's the fiber preference that you've heard us talk about.
Okay, thank you. Drew Clark with Broadband Breakfast. Really enjoy hearing this topic, and want to remind the audience that there will be an event here tomorrow in the Rivergate Room on state broadband leaders and the middle mile. So encourage all of you to attend at 12:30 for broadband breakfast for lunch. So my question is also on the middle mile. I just want to ask Dan and also Jessica and William if you have thoughts
put in applications for that middle mile. So we're very much looking forward to what Will decides over there with him and his team. But as we think about, middle mile, it is so important for all of this, right? As I said earlier, edge, I can't think of a day where I don't hear the word edge. And I hope that as part of this, we are moving to a place where that edge is something that is just kind of moot at this point. And so as we continue to invest in middle mile and connect that last mile, that will be extremely important as part of all of this. And I think that's why, Zayo was recently acquired by a private equity firm, DigitalBridge and EQT. And as part of that, the investment structure was to build. In a place where building is much harder than it was 10, 20 years ago, Zayo is very much investing in building. And the idea is that as part of that middle mile and that investment, the return will be tenfold. But it's a long range play. It's not short term, and part of that is as we continue to see that bandwidth consumption increase, Zayo will be the partner to really help as we push out that last mile.
And I think I would just throw out, I think that's, these middle mile programs, be it NTIA or, any time there's an opportunity for a middle mile funding opportunity, I think it's important for providers to understand if that's their space and that's their role. It's going to be all providers of all types applying and deploying the appropriate technology to make this all come together and to truly solve the digital divide in all these underserved and unserved locations.
And that's why it is a fiber focus, right? As Will said, it is because fiber is what will be the most scalable as we look to deploy this and go to market.
Yeah, I'm not sure that I have too much more to add there. I think I would just say, Drew, is to remember the difference between the BEAD program and middle mile, which is where the BEAD program, the money flows from the NTIA to eligible entities. Eligible entities are states, so the money's going from NTIA to states. For the middle mile program, we received applicants, and the applicants could be states. It could also be privately held companies. So there's a bit of a difference there just in terms of who's actually receiving the money, and then there's rule sets that apply to states that are slightly different than privately held companies within the realm of middle mile. So just throwing out that there, and that they're slightly different programs. I did not mention that we issued a waiver for the middle mile program. Thank you, Drew. So we released a waiver for the middle mile program. This came out about 2.5 weeks ago. So again, this is going back to this Buy America requirement that we talked about a little bit earlier in the program. So the waiver for the middle mile program came out, and we waived essentially all products other than fiber optic cable. So that was the waiver for the middle mile program. Shouldn't be viewed as precedential for the waiver that will be coming for the BEAD program.
Yeah, and the only other question I would have, Jessica mentioned, there'll be a lot of different providers wanting to participate. Are you seeing a lot of variety here in the beginning? What kind of variety? I mean, are we mainly talking about existing service providers?
Well, I think the big differentiator for BEAD is that the BEAD NOFO that came out from NTIA specifically called out non-traditional ISPs, so electric cooperatives, municipalities, and tribal territories to get into, the fiber broadband world. And so I think we're starting to see a lot of what we call greenfield providers, providers that maybe haven't been traditionally viewed as broadband providers. But certainly, and I think again, it's just this, I may sound like a little bit of a broken record, but it's going to take all players to come together and work towards a common goal of getting service to all unserved and underserved locations. And I think that's really NTIA, it's very obvious that that's NTIA's, the heart of their initiative is to truly empower all types of providers to get in the game and be a part of the solution.
Okay. I feel like we really covered it, so thank you so much, and I want to thank my panel. I appreciate it.